Huh? This makes no sense. While I was out shopping in a town I usually don't go to, I saw my husband and my mother arm in arm, walking together and kissing without a care in the world. Shocked, I ran up to them and confronted them, but instead of being embarrassed, they shamelessly shrugged it off. I immediately went to my father's house, told him about the two of them, and got a divorce. After my father passed away, I ended up meeting my mother and ex-husband again. When I saw my mother after a long time, she was wearing loose clothes, and her clearly swollen belly caught my attention. Noticing my gaze, she smiled triumphantly. "Oh, you noticed? I'm pregnant. You couldn't have kids, could you? Unlike you, we got pregnant right away. Finally, I get to be a father. I'm so glad I divorced you." They threw the most hurtful words they could at me. However, their attempts backfired. I was not hurt at all. Ha! Ha! Oh, this is hilarious. You both look so stupid together. I laughed, clutching my stomach. My name is Nina, a 24-year-old office worker. My parents had me when they were very young. It was a so-called shotgun wedding. Both of my parents were quite flashy in their youth. My mother, Ally, met my father, Ken, a construction worker, when she was a 16-year-old high school student, and I was born soon after. The story of how they met involves my mother falling in love at first sight and pursuing my father until he finally gave in and started dating her. Soon, she got pregnant with me, and they got married. Marrying as a high school student was heavily criticized by everyone around them, but since my mother was already pregnant with me, they had no choice but to accept it. Their young marriage seemed to go well at first. When I was in kindergarten, my father often picked me up when it rained, as he couldn't work those days. Nina's dad is so young and cool. Isn't he? He's kind and I love him. I loved walking home with my dad, sharing stories under an umbrella. But then something happened that changed my mother's attitude toward my father completely. My father had a terrible accident at work, falling while dismantling scaffolding, and was seriously injured. When my father was left with severe bruises and multiple fractures, my mother turned cold towards him. Although his life wasn't in danger, my father was left with permanent physical damage and could no longer continue his construction job. Thanks to rehabilitation, he was able to walk again and found a new job through a friend. However, he still needed long-term rehab after being discharged from the hospital. My mother, however, refused to help him in any way, from hospital visits to daily care, acting as if it had nothing to do with her. Even when my father fell in the hallway and couldn't get up, she ignored him or made sarcastic remarks. Falling so dramatically, how pathetic. I regret marrying such a burden. I should have looked at more men before settling. My mother would complain about my father in front of me, as if it were a mantra. To me, it looked like she was bullying him, and I honestly didn't like my mother. My father had to cut back on work to go to rehab, and we were far from wealthy. Since my mother worked at night, I spent most of my time with my father and was more attached to him than to my mother. Maybe my mother noticed this, or perhaps she never liked kids in the first place, but she only gave me the bare minimum of care. I managed to graduate high school, but my mother told me to work and help with the household instead of going to college, so I got a job at a small local company. I'm sorry, Nina, because of my condition, you're burdened. Don't say that. I'm happy to work if it helps you, Dad. My father apologized with a pained expression when I decided to work instead of going to college. I didn't want to obey my mother, but I worked hard for my father's sake. After a few years at work, I got used to my job and married my senior colleague, Frank. I wanted to build a warm family with him, unlike my parents' cold relationship. I'll take good care of you, Nina. Let's be happy together and have lots of kids. I was so happy to hear those words that I accepted his proposal without hesitation. However, a year into our marriage, there was no sign of us having children. I wanted kids too, but no matter how long we waited, I didn't get pregnant. Frank started putting pressure on me as if it were all my fault. Why can't we have kids? All my colleagues already have kids. It must be your fault. What a defective wife. Don't say that. It's not just my problem. You should come to the OBGYN with me and get checked. Huh? Why should I go through that hassle? I've always been healthy. It's definitely your fault we can't have kids. Despite suggesting fertility treatments, my husband refused to listen and kept blaming me. Stop making excuses and get treated at the hospital. We got married, and now I'm embarrassed because we can't have kids. He wouldn't listen to anything I said and kept blaming me. I tried fertility treatments alone, holding on to a sliver of hope, but I never got pregnant. Eventually, Frank stopped coming home as often. He claimed to be busy with work and often came home in the morning. Is it really work? Could he be cheating on me? Now that I think about it, there were many reasons to suspect my husband. His clothes smelled of women's perfume when he came home in the morning. And not just once, but multiple times. Also, his credit card statements showed unexplained charges, fueling my suspicions. I was biding my time, waiting for the right moment to confront him, and that opportunity came soon. One day, I went shopping in a town I usually don't go to. I saw my husband, who had said he was working on his day off. Is that Frank? But isn't he supposed to be at work? As I was about to call out to him, I noticed a woman walking beside him. Why are Mom and Frank walking together? My mother was happily walking next to him. Since getting married, I had kept my distance from my mother. I visited my father at home, but I rarely took my husband to my parents' house. They hadn't spoken since our wedding. Suspicious, I watched them from a distance. They held hands and, to my horror, kissed right in front of me. Huh? This makes no sense, I shouted. Unaware of my presence, they kept walking. Finally, I yelled out. Hey, Frank. Mom. What are you doing? I ran up to them, and they finally noticed me, looking shocked. Oh, Nina, what's the rush? What do you mean? What are you two doing? What? I just ran into Frank by chance and said hello. What's the big deal? It seemed my mother intended to play dumb. She looked much younger than her age. As I got closer, I noticed something familiar. This scent. I've smelled it before. My mother's perfume was the same scent I'd smelled on my husband's clothes when he came home late. I didn't want to believe it, but I was now certain my mother was the woman my husband was cheating with. Don't lie to me. I saw you. I saw you and Frank kissing. Huh? It must be a mistake. We just ran into each other. When I confronted them, they exchanged nervous glances, but, after a moment of silence, Frank spoke up, resigned. I didn't expect to get caught so soon. What are you doing here? What do you mean, what's going on? I thought I could deceive you for a little longer since you're so oblivious, but, yeah, you saw it. I prefer older women. I'm sorry, Nina. I felt bad about it, but Frank was my type from the moment we met. My mother and husband shamelessly confessed. We ran into each other by chance and had a chat over coffee, and things just got a little heated. I'm still young, and I still want to experience love. Our marriage was rocky, and Ally listened to me. The more we talked, the more I was drawn to her. Oh yes, Nina, I heard you were having trouble conceiving. Frank really wants a son. It's sad that it's your fault. You told my mother that. It's the truth, isn't it? We can't have kids because of your faulty body. I couldn't believe it. My husband had shared our most private matters with my mother. Despite my struggle with infertility, seeking advice that he ignored, he painted himself as the victim. Anger surged within me, and I realized there was no way I could stay married to this man. How could you? Do you understand what you've done? I shouted at them as they continued to make excuses. It's your fault for being a lousy wife and a woman. What? I don't need a husband like you. I want a divorce. Fine. I've been sick of you for a long time. I'll be glad to get rid of you, defective wife. I didn't mean to, but it seems I've taken your precious husband. Sorry about that. My mother offered a hollow apology, clearly insincere. You realize Dad will divorce you if I tell him about your affair, right? My mother's expression briefly faltered but quickly regained her composure. You have no proof of the affair. You and Frank can divorce, but I'll divorce on my terms. Let's go, Frank. My mother urged Frank, and they quickly walked away. Despite their obvious affair, my mother didn't want to divorce my father immediately. I went to my father's house and told him everything. I endured her for your sake, Nina, but I can't believe she would treat you like this. My father looked pained as he spoke. I'm divorcing Frank. I can't stay married after what happened. What about you, Dad? Don't worry. I have a plan. I won't let them have their way. Frank sent me a signed divorce agreement, and I signed it, finalizing our divorce. My mother didn't return home and apparently eloped with Frank. Though it angered me, my father advised me to forget about them, so I did. After leaving the apartment I shared with Frank, I moved back home. My father had regained much of his mobility and could do most things himself. Ironically, my mother's neglect had forced him to become self-sufficient. Despite everything, I'm glad to have you back, Nina. Thank you for coming home. I enjoyed a brief period of peace with my father, but it didn't last. My father contracted pneumonia and was soon fighting for his life. Nina, I'm sorry for all the hardship. Live your life freely now. He held my hand tightly as he spoke, his consciousness fading. I nodded, tears in my eyes. Despite treatment, my father's condition deteriorated, and he passed away. Dad. I can't believe you're gone. I should have done more for you. While preparing for his funeral, an unexpected visitor arrived. Long time no see. Heard he died? My mother, with Frank beside her, walked into the house with a smug grin. What are you doing here? Leave. What? Who do you think you are? I'm his wife. It's natural for me to be here. How dare you? You ran off and cut ties for years. Say what you want. I'm still his wife, which means I have a right to his estate. He had life insurance too, didn't he? I can't believe this. So that's why you never divorced him. After retiring from construction, my father had worked his way up in his new job, earning a respectable position. Despite his lack of formal education, his determination and hard work had earned him many loyal subordinates. Not divorcing him paid off. Now, let's talk about the inheritance. He was frugal, so I know he's saved up. Come on. My mother pressed me, and I noticed her belly. My mother, wearing loose clothing, her belly was clearly swollen. Seeing my gaze, she smiled triumphantly. Oh, you noticed? Yes, I'm pregnant with Frank's child. Unlike you, I had no trouble conceiving. I'll give him the child you couldn't. Unlike you, we had no trouble having a child. I'm finally going to be a father. I'm so glad I left you. They threw their hurtful words at me. But their efforts were in vain. I wasn't hurt at all. Ha! Ha! This is hilarious. You both look so stupid. I laughed, clutching my stomach. They looked at me, dumbfounded. What's so funny? It's just too funny. But, tell me, are you sure that child is Frank's? Frank, irritated, asked, what? But my mother's reaction was telling. Her eyes darted nervously. Frank didn't seem to notice. Of course, it's my child. Don't make stuff up out of spite. Yes, don't be a sore loser. Let's see who's lying. I left the room and returned with a document, thrusting it in front of them. What's this? What's so shocking? It's probably nothing, huh? What's this? They stared at the document, stunned. It was a private investigator's report on my mother's relationships. After my mother eloped with Frank, I had seen her with a young man, not Frank. Following them, I saw them enter a hotel. Could it be? I had my mother investigated, suspecting this might be useful someday. The report confirmed my mother was involved with another man. Frank, desperate, read through the report. The details of my mother's affair were all there. As he finished, he glared at my mother. "What's this? You've been deceiving me." "No, it's a lie. Nina is lying. The baby is yours." My mother, panicked, insisted the baby was Frank's. "Who do you believe? Her or me?" "That's true." Trying to frame her own mother just because she couldn't have children, what a despicable woman. Frank seemed to regain his composure after being convinced by my mother. It looked like he decided the report was a lie and began to blame me, ignoring his own actions. "You can believe what you want, but unfortunately, there's undeniable proof. You can come out now." I called out to the adjacent room from the living room. A man stepped out and entered the room. "Who's that guy? Who is he?" "I don't know him." Both of them looked puzzled, not recognizing him. "This is my husband. You wouldn't know, but I remarried. His name is Tim. A year after my divorce from Frank, I met him through a friend and remarried." "What proof does this guy have?" "Unlike my mother, you can't see it yet, but I'm also pregnant." "Of course, it's his child." "So what? Spit it out. Don't you get it? When I was married to you, no matter how hard we tried, I couldn't conceive. But after marrying Tim, I got pregnant right away." Frank's eyes widened as he understood the implication of my words. "You refused to go to the hospital because it was too much trouble, but I got tested and confirmed that there was nothing wrong with my fertility. So, the problem was you." "That's not true, it can't be." "But it's strange, isn't it? You should have trouble conceiving, yet my mother is pregnant. Is it really your child?" When I asked, Frank couldn't respond and glared at Ally. "Come on, be honest." "All right, I admit it. I lost." "Oh, you gave up quickly. I thought you'd keep denying it longer." "It was just a fling with Frank." "What? What do you mean?" "I was with you because you were Nina's husband. You know, wanting what belongs to others. But my real interest is someone else. I was planning to break up with you soon." Frank looked shocked and stunned by my mother's words. "I planned to enjoy my affairs until I got caught, but that didn't work out. Anyway, it doesn't matter whose child I'm carrying. I still have the right to his inheritance. Are you still talking about that? Give it up." "What? How many times do I have to tell you? I'm his wife. I have the right to his estate. I told you, you have no such right. You and Dad have been divorced for a long time." "What? That's impossible." "Maybe you forgot, but Dad had the signed divorce papers." When I reported my mother's affair to my father, he produced the divorce papers. According to my father, during a big fight they had after he got injured and couldn't work, my mother said, "I don't need a husband who can't move," and handed him the signed divorce papers. He kept them without submitting them because of me, but he eventually filed them and divorced her. "So, you won't get a penny of Dad's estate. Do you understand now?" "No, this can't be." My mother, who had been so confident, turned pale. Frank was still glaring at her. "I'm leaving." Realizing her affair was exposed and she wouldn't get any inheritance, my mother fled. She later gave birth to a boy, but a DNA test confirmed it wasn't Frank's child. Frank said, "I never realized she was such a tramp," and abandoned my mother after realizing he wouldn't get any inheritance, disappearing without a trace. The man my mother considered her real partner also left when he found out she was pregnant. In the end, my mother became a single mother at 40, raising her child with government assistance. I once saw her from a distance. She looked more like a grandmother than a mother with her graying hair. On the other hand, I gave birth to a healthy baby girl and now live happily with my new family. Ironically, my mother's child is my half-brother and the same age as my daughter, making for a complicated situation. We plan to visit my father's grave as a family on the anniversary of his death. Despite the betrayal, I found an irreplaceable family. I'm sure you're watching over us from heaven, Dad. With my father's love in my heart, I'll continue to cherish my family.